Imagine facing an entire empire alone, confronting face-to-face a cruel king, his murderous wife, and 850 pagan prophets thirsty for your blood. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But today, I'm going to tell you the story of a man who did exactly that. He had no army, no wealth, not even a fixed place to live. All he had was unwavering faith and the certainty that he was on the right side of history. And you know what's most impressive? He won. But before his victory, he had to learn the greatest lesson of his life. A lesson that can completely change your story today. Elijah. A name that means, "My God is the Lord." And it was precisely on this battlefield that he fought, to prove who the true God was in a divided and corrupted nation. Imagine a country where worshipping the true God meant a death sentence, where evil had become state policy and idolatry was the law. This was Israel in the days of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. But how does an ordinary man become one of the greatest prophets of all time? How did he find the courage to face an entire system alone? And more importantly, what does his story teach us about confronting our own empires today? In this video, I'm going to show you the behind the scenes of this epic story. I will reveal not only the moments of glory, but also the internal struggles, the fears, and the discoveries that transformed an ordinary man into a legend. And get ready, because in the end, you'll discover that you have much more in common with Elijah than you think. At a time when Israel was going through its worst spiritual crisis, an extraordinary man emerged, yet of humble origin. Elijah, the Tishbite, from the inhabitants of Gilead. This is how the Bible introduces him, without mentioning his family or lineage. Dressed in animal skins and a leather belt, his rustic appearance contrasted sharply with the sophistication of the royal court. The setting was devastating. King Ahab, considered by scripture as the worst king Israel had ever had married Jezebel, the daughter of the king of Sidon. This political marriage brought catastrophic consequences for the people's spirituality. Jezebel was not just a foreign princess, she was a fervent priestess of Baal and Asherah, pagan deities associated with fertility and natural cycles. Under her influence, Ahab built a temple for Baal in Samaria, the kingdom's capital. Pagan altars sprouted across the country like weeds. But Jezebel went further. She established a systematic program to exterminate the Lord's prophets, while maintaining 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah from the royal treasury. The few true prophets who survived lived hidden in caves, secretly fed by faithful palace servants. Worshipping the true God had become a capital crime. Human sacrifices, once unthinkable in Israel, now happened openly. The people, seduced by sensual rituals and occult practices, quickly abandoned their parents' faith. It was in this context that Elijah made his first public appearance. Without invitation or announcement, he walked through the gates of the royal palace. The guards, surprised by his audacity, couldn't stop him. Before Ahab's throne, he spoke words that would sound like a bomb. "The Lord, the God of Israel, is alive. As I live, there will be neither dew nor rain in these years, except at my word." This was not a simple prophecy. It was a declaration of spiritual war. Baal was considered the god of rain, storms, and fertility. His worshippers believed he controlled the natural elements. By decreeing drought, Elijah was directly challenging Baal's power in his own territory. The choice of words was precise. "The Lord is alive," a statement of the true God's existence in contrast to dead idols. "As I live," declaring his position as the authorized servant of the Most High. "Except at my word," establishing that rain would only return through the power of the God of Israel. The reaction was immediate. Jezebel, enraged, intensified the persecution of the prophets and put a bounty on Elijah's head. Military detachments were sent not only throughout Israel, but also to neighboring kingdoms, with orders to capture him alive or dead. King Ahab even demanded oaths from the rulers of neighboring nations that they were not hiding the prophet. God then commands Elijah to hide by the Cherith ravine, east of the Jordan River. This period would be crucial for his spiritual formation. In the isolation of the desert, away from the pursuer's eyes, God established a supernatural provision system. Ravens brought bread and meat twice a day. The choice of ravens was not random. In Moses' law, these birds were considered unclean and could not be eaten by the Israelites. They were known for their selfish behavior, stealing food and abandoning their own chicks. Yet God used them to feed his prophet, demonstrating that he can use the most unlikely means to fulfill his purposes. When the brook dried up, God directed Elijah to Zarephath, a city in the heart of Phoenicia, Jezebel's homeland. The order seemed paradoxical. Seek refuge precisely in the land of his persecutors, but God's ways often defy human logic. Upon arriving at the city gates, he found a widow gathering sticks. Her situation was desperate. She had only a handful of flour and a little olive oil left. She planned to prepare a final meal for herself and her son before they died of starvation. Elijah's request sounded absurd. "First, make a small loaf of bread for me." What followed was one of the most extraordinary continuous provision miracles recorded in the Bible. The flour and oil never ran out, sustaining not only the widow and her son, but also the prophet throughout the drought period. It was a living demonstration of the God of Israel's power in pagan territory, but the widow's faith would be tested beyond limits when her son became ill and died. In her grief, she questioned whether the prophet's presence had brought judgment upon her household. Elijah, moved by compassion and faith, did something unprecedented. He took the boy to his room, lay on him 3 times, and called upon God for his life. It was the first recorded case of resurrection in the scriptures. After 3.5 years of devastating drought, the time for the final confrontation arrived. Elijah reappeared before Ahab and proposed a public challenge. Gather all the people on Mount Carmel, along with the 850 pagan prophets, to determine who the true God was. Mount Carmel was not chosen by chance. It was considered sacred both to Baal worshippers and to the Israelites. Its strategic location, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, made it the perfect stage for this spiritual showdown. The terms of the challenge were simple: 2 altars, 2 sacrifices, but no human-made fire. The God who responded with fire from heaven would be recognized as the true God. The prophets of Baal began at dawn. They danced, shouted, cut themselves with knives and axes until they bled, going into frenzied trances. Hours passed without a response. Then Elijah began his sarcastic provocations. "Shout louder! After all, he's a god. Maybe he's meditating or busy or traveling. Perhaps he's sleeping and needs to be awakened." Every word exposed the futility of idolatry. At dusk, it was Elijah's turn. First, he rebuilt the Lord's old altar using 12 stones, representing the unity of Israel's tribes. He dug a trench around it and ordered them to pour water over the sacrifice 3 times until it overflowed. It was an act of extreme faith. In times of severe drought, wasting water in this manner seemed crazy. His prayer was brief but powerful. "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, show your servant today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant, and that I have done all this at your command. Answer me, Lord, so that this people may know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back." The fire that fell from heaven was so intense that it consumed not only the sacrifice, but also the wood, the stones, the dust, and even the water in the trench. The impact was overwhelming. The people fell face down, crying out, "Lord, He is God! Lord, He is God!" The victory at Carmel was followed by a dramatic turn of events. Instead of surrendering before the demonstrated power, Jezebel vowed to kill Elijah within 24 hours. Surprisingly, the prophet, who had faced 850 adversaries, fled in fear. His journey led him to Mount Horeb, where, exhausted and depressed, he asked for death. "Enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." It was the spiritual burnout of a man who had given his all in the battle. It was then that God prepared a unique demonstration. Not in the fierce wind that shattered rocks, not in the earthquake that shook mountains, not in the consuming fire, manifestations of power that Elijah knew well, but in a gentle breeze, almost imperceptible, God whispered to his servant, "This." Experience profoundly transformed Elijah's understanding of prophetic ministry. He learned that God's power does not always manifest in spectacular displays, but often operates in silence, intimacy, and the gradual transformation of hearts. Friends, Elijah's story is not just a historical account. It is a mirror where we can see our own struggles and victories. Think about it. How many times have we felt alone in a system that seems to work against everything we believe? How many times have we needed to take a stand, even when it meant swimming against the current? What we learn from Elijah is that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to remain faithful, even when we tremble inside. He taught us that the greatest miracles often happen after the greatest deserts, and that God works both in the spectacular fire of Carmel and in the gentle whisper of Horeb. But perhaps the deepest lesson is this: God does not seek superheroes. He seeks ordinary people willing to be used in extraordinary ways. Elijah was a man like any of us, with his fears, doubts, and moments of weakness. What made him exceptional was his willingness to make himself available to God, even when everything seemed lost. Today, you may be facing your own Mount Carmel, your own Jezebel, your own desert. Maybe you feel alone in the struggle as Elijah did. But remember, the same God who responded with fire, who multiplied the flour, who spoke in a whisper, is alive and continues to work today. And here is the challenge I leave with you. What kind of story does God want to write through your life? What empires does He want you to confront? What lives does He want to reach through your testimony? If this message touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with others who need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more content that will strengthen your faith and transform your life. And don't miss our next video on the 7 most powerful prayers in the Bible. You'll be amazed at what God has prepared for you. I conclude with Elijah's own words on Mount Carmel. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow Him. The choice is yours now. The extraordinary is not in the great moments, but in the courage of the daily decisions we make for God.